everybody!
The day has come.
Welcome back!
It's happening.
I'm
It's happening.
so excited about today.
It's happening.
Because today we played a game that I love, a game that I have a lot of personal history with, and a game that, for me, playing it is like sinking into a nice, warm bath of comfort.
Am I this annoying when I when I gush about things?
Today we played Final Fantasy Tactics for the PlayStation, and it was super good.
We played it.
Spoilers, it was great.
We played Final Fantasy Tactics.
Did you not? Did you not play
I already
it?
told you.
You haven't told them. Did you not play this game?
I played what I consider to be the most that I could possibly play.
Okay. So, before we get into how Russ failed this review, we can start with personal history.
When I was 16, I bought a PlayStation with probably my second paycheck from my job at a fast food restaurant. And I went to Walmart and I bought the PlayStation and I bought Final Fantasy VII and the Lunar remake. And the woman that was checking me out, who weirdly at a Walmart in like 1998, I guess knew a lot about video games. And she was like, oh, there's also this other Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy Tactics, that you might be interested in. And I looked at the back of the case, and I said, no, I don't think I'm interested in that one, but thank you. I'll just take the PlayStation, the Final Fantasy VII, and the Lunar, and I've never regretted my decision.
I actually have personal history for this. I did not buy my own PlayStation. I got it as a Christmas present many years after it came out. If I recall correctly, when I actually got the PlayStation, Final Fantasy VII, 8 had already come out. 9 might have. No, I think I bought 9. So it was after Final Fantasy 8 had come out. But I did go and buy Final Fantasy Tactics for myself. It was like... It got some special gold collection for the PlayStation, or PlayStation's Greatest Hits, that's what it was called. And I liked Final Fantasy, and I thought, oh, I'll play this. And I loved it. I played it a lot, although weirdly, I never actually beat it until probably 5 years ago. I also have a very close friend of mine who loves Final Fantasy Tactics way more than I do. She played it so long she broke the timer that keeps track of how many hours you've logged. She maxed it out. I like Final Fantasy Tactics. I have probably mentioned it in a review or two before, with Russ giving me weird looks, that I love the incidental sounds. I like the soundtrack. I like the characters. I love the job system. This is one of the few games that we've done in this series where I have an investment in personal history. I played this thing. I love this thing. And I was happy to revisit it for this. The youngest son of a noble family abandons the knighthood for life as a mercenary due to tragic events. He then finds himself embroiled in a war for secession that will leave him questioning everything he knows about his world. That's
your
the story.
Friend is sad, who has timed out the timer on Final Fantasy Tactics. I just feel bad for her.
Russ, we're here to talk about the story.
And I kind of want to just like wrap her in a blanket and like pat her head and say it's all going to be okay.
We're here to talk about the story and the characters.
All right.
And even you admitted you liked the story.
I do admit that. I liked the story enough. It was it falls in line with the other like Ivalice Final Fantasy games.
Well, this was the original Ivalice Final Fantasy
Vagrant
game.
Story was the original.
Was it?
Was Vagrant Story before or after?
I think it was after this.
Was it after? Okay, well, good. Well, cool.
I think
Then
this
good on
established the setting.
it. Okay. Well, I like the Ivalice games. Is what I'm saying in terms of the story. And Final Fantasy 12 is one of my favorite Final Fantasies. And it's very. I've heard Final Fantasy 12 described as like kind of a Final Fantasy Game of Thrones. And I think
this
fits
had that.
Yeah,
this was much more that.
Yeah, this has that in spades. So I will give it that I like the story, and I like the story enough that even though the gameplay was, I did just watch YouTube videos of the story because I wanted to see how it all played out. Yeah, so I will say thumbs up on the story.
Yeah, it is a great story. That setup that I gave it, oftentimes when I write those descriptions, they're kind of overselling what the game actually gives us, and in this case, it's not. It is actually an epic tale of betrayals and houses at war and friendships and family ties broken, with some mysticism thrown in.
Right.
It's a solid story. You got to pay attention. It's a deep story
for the kingship and this and that. The only thing that I didn't like is that Japan and their little sisters, because it does all kind of come down to save the little sister, save the world. Yeah. But other than that, I mean, there's a lot.
Well, and speaking of the little sister, Russ, what did you think of the characters?
Well, I mean, they were the characters. The characters that actually played a part in the story and had names and everything were good. I liked Agrius and Orlando, and I liked that. What I didn't like was when you're like making your party and you're just like taking these random Emily the Knight or whatever.
When you start out the game,
absolutely nothing to do with the story.
When you start out the game, the majority of your party is made up of. They have names, but their personality, they're blank slates.
They're blank slates. They're squires or they're chemists.
And then you grow them and you spend time with them, and any character they have is what you give them in your own mind. But as the story goes on, you meet NPCs, Mustadio.
Yeah, and Gafgarian.
Yeah, who join your party with special abilities and are part of the story. And you find yourself relying less and less on the blank templates that you've made, unless you made one really good. And more relying on these special NPCs who do have personality, who do have story.
And I was relieved when I was relieved that is part of it. I mean, I didn't get very far to the point I was really amassing those characters, but I know I've talked to you personally about Disgaea a lot and how I don't like Disgaea, and part of it is because you're just taking a character class and you're giving it a name, and it's not like... I mean, there are like 5 story characters in those games, and then it's just like random. You create a warrior, you create a monk, whatever, and I don't like that.
And this game starts that way, but it grows as you... And I kind of like that too, because there's a lot of story going on in this world, and if you just gave me all of these characters with backstories all at once, it would just become white noise to me. Yeah. But instead, as you progress through the story... you meet characters with personalities and backstories that accumulate. So you have time to kind of get into it. Yeah. So I think it's really well done. I think the story and the characters, even Russ, who hates this game...
Yes, I hate the gameplay in this game. This is just... It's an unpopular opinion, but I'm just not a tactical RPG person unless it has Fire Emblem in the title.
Because then it has a dating sim attached.
And I'll explain that. When we talk about the combat system, that's going to be my contribution.
Okay.
But yes, the story, it is worth, like, even if you're totally not into this type of game, to just, like, go watch the story on YouTube.
And the characters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we both agree, story and characters, great. Now we're going to get to the part where we disagree. Combat system. So if you haven't played it, let me set the stage for you a little bit. It's a tactical, turn-based RPG.
I'll correct you as you make mistakes.
Think Fire Emblem.
No.
Shining Force.
Don't think Fire Emblem.
I'm just setting the basics here. I'm describing the basics.
This might be our most entertaining episode yet.
In terms of how combat works, think Fire Emblem, think Shining Force, think Hyper Devotion Noir, Goddess Blackheart, the mainstays of the tactical RPG realm. One of the biggest differences compared to those games, though, is that in this game the terrain is three-dimensional. So you'll often find movement is hampered or increased, or range attacks are hampered or increased based on the height of the terrain you're trying to travel to and from. Also, a significant difference that I don't see in most other tactical RPGs is the direction that you attack an enemy from increases likelihood to hit and damage. It's better to attack an enemy from behind or from the side than attacking them from the front, which I like as a mechanic because it makes you think more about character placement and which way your character's facing. And I don't see a lot of games do it that way. And then I have one other topic on this, but we can wait for Russ to unleash. Go ahead.
Don't think of Fire Emblem.
Unless
my point.
Unless you're trying to picture in your head how this works, because
Fire Emblem is fun because they use systems like the weapon triangle, like this weapon beats this weapon beats this weapon, and like flying units are weak to arrows and armored units are weak to magic, and they use all of those sort of systems to keep the game to use real strategy and keep the game moving at like a steady beat. So like you have this sword user and it's like, okay, this person uses a sword, so they need to move here, and they can like one hit kill this character, and then we just keep the thing moving. Final Fantasy Tactics, the reason it was so frustrating to me is especially at the very beginning, all your characters are squires or chemists. Your chemists are there to heal and your squires are there to attack. And it's literally just moving to chip away at the HP of the enemy before the enemy can chip away at your HP. And that's all it is. It's not using like actual strategy to say, okay, there's a Pegasus over there, so I need to send my archer over there, but then he's weak, so I need to send this knight with him because she's strong and protect her, but then he can use the arrow to take it. It's not that. It's just like, can I get this character to this point, and then we just attack, and then they attack, and then they attack, and you just hope that you chip their HP before they chip yours. And it was
I see some of your
very
point,
frustrating.
but I think there is more strategy, especially later on.
Now, I will give you, and I will concede, that as you go on and you have more classes and things like that, it does get, I mean, I saw it get a little better, and I'm sure it would improve more.
Yeah, because there's strategies of, okay, I want to get my ranged person to the high ground.
Yeah.
I got to make sure my mages stay behind my heavy hitters.
But the thing about Fire Emblem is that it gives you like one of all the classes in the first like 3 chapters or whatever.
Whereas in this one you have to earn it. You have to train towards it.
But you shouldn't have to. That's not the way. I think my point is that's. I'm real serious about this for some reason, and I don't know why. But that's not the way that you get a person into a game. You don't
got me into it.
You don't get a person
because you build into it. It's kind of. No. You, for me, the first battle was welcome to the mechanics of a tactical RPG.
And that's another thing. So the first battle, I think they could have used that as a way to show off like all of the cool things you can eventually do, but they don't because they only let you control Ramza.
Yeah.
And then you have to just watch all your other cooler characters do all these cool things.
I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking about the first actual...
And you can't do any of it. So they give you this intro where you've got like this Dark Knight and whatever, and he can use a soul sucker or whatever, and but the computer is controlling them, and all you have is Ramza, who can only move a little bit and throw a stone or whatever. So it's not a good way to introduce. And then they put you in that first like real battle. And again, like I said, it's just a bunch of squires. So you've all got your little dagger, and you're just like trying to advance on the enemy and chip them down before they can chip you down.
I will agree that Final Fantasy Tactics is a slower build than Fire Emblem, where you're heavy hitting right from the get-go.
Fire Emblem has been that way since the beginning. I mean, even the old NES games that we never got have been that way since the beginning, where like you start and you have like one of all the character classes you're going to have, and then you have to start building that strategy. You don't have to work into it. And I don't feel like you should have to like earn the ability for the game to be fun.
See, and I disagree. I think the game is fun right from the get-go.
No. Like, if all games had to earn the right to be fun.
Like Final Fantasy 13?
Final Fantasy 13. Yeah, Final Fantasy 13 is terrible.
Yeah.
Why are you arguing that?
That's where you earn the right to have fun. I don't feel like
Final
Tactics
Fantasy
applies.
13 is bad.
It is. Final Fantasy Tactics, I disagree.
Final Fantasy 13 puts you in a tutorial for 10 hours.
It's more than 10 hours.
And then, like, yeah.
But I disagree that Final Fantasy Tactics grows to be fun.
And that's fine. I mean, like, I get that this is an unpopular opinion, but it's just, like, it was really, it all became really clear why I love Fire Emblem so much, playing this. Because I looked at this game, and then I looked, because I have always thought it's weird, like, I don't like any other strategy RPGs except
I've noticed.
Fire Emblem. And it all sort of coalesced into this, like, I totally understand what it is about Fire Emblem now that grabs me, because it is, you are in it, and you're doing the high-level strategy, like, from the beginning, almost, in a Fire Emblem game. I mean, by, like, Chapter 2, you're really in it.
And I'll say that Final Fantasy Tactics does work you into all of the mechanics of the game more slowly. But again, I like it for that, because it introduces you to the game. Like it introduces you to the characters and the story slowly, instead of front-loading it all at the beginning. It also does the same thing with the mechanics and the job classes and the abilities. And I'm okay with that. It's a leisurely play. This is not something you sit down and start kicking ass. Your characters start out as students at a night school. Night school. Start out as trainee knights.
Too many games are about your students at a blank school now.
And build yourself up. I mean, it even makes sense in the context. That your characters have to learn to get better at things.
It just.
So this is a point Russ and I are going to fundamentally disagree on as to whether or not this is fun.
And then the other point
Russ is going to be wrong.
Is that all of the Fire Emblem all the Fire Emblem characters are, they're not just generic blank slates. This is like the worst time for that to happen.
Our music reviewer has arrived. Hold on, one moment.
Am I interrupting filming?
It's fine. Come on in.
Greetings.
Russ was just being wrong.
Noah's being totally right.
Russ was...
I was in the middle of schooling, Jeff.
No, Russ was in the middle of being very wrong about what is and is not a fun game. But we're going to go ahead and move on to innovations, because he's never going to come around and be right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to innovations where Russ can continue to disagree with me and continue to be wrong.
Done. I've said my piece.
No, thank God.
So...
Alright, so even Russ can't argue with this one. It has a really good job system. Right?
Yeah, because I love Final Fantasy job systems. Yes.
And I would argue that this is one of the best Final Fantasy job systems, because actions are an experience, right? So even if you have characters who aren't necessarily combat-oriented, they can still get stronger just from supporting the party. Just a healer healing gets better and gets experience and gets job points. Job points are used to buy more abilities. And as you start mixing and matching jobs, you actually... Each character has 5 skill slots, essentially. One of the skill slots is locked into whatever job you've currently given them. But the other 4 can be any skills you've learned from any previous jobs.
So it's Final Fantasy V.
It's even more so, though, because
Right.
Final Fantasy V had, 2 slots.
Yes.
You got to mix a previous job with a current job. This one, it's 2 active, which are I can use black magic and white magic, or I can have this set of attack skills and this set of attack skills. But then there's also a movement ability that can come from any 5, which is I can ignore terrain, I can find objects, I can teleport. There's a reaction ability. When somebody hits me, I counter with casting Protect on myself. I counter with casting a magic spell that destroys them. I counter with shoving them off a cliff.
You're very excited about
I
this.
like this game.
I'm glad. I'm glad you enjoy yourself.
And then there's a passive skill, which is, even though I'm a white mage, I can equip axes. Or...
Yes, you can.
the point is there's really a lot to work with the job system. This is what you sound like when you're excited about games. I want you to know.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just annoying.
For once, I have an opinion.
Great. I'm proud of you.
So
I do like Final Fantasy job system.
We talked about in the Final Fantasy Legends 2 review, we talked about how if you really wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of it, there's a lot that you could play with. Or you could just play the game more at a surface level. This job system is very similar. There is a lot of tinkering you can do to adjust each and every character the way you want them. You can really build the characters of your dreams. You can get in there. Or you could just not worry about it so much and play more on the surface level.
Right.
But there's a lot of depth here. There's a lot of potential here. And to really make Russ look at me weird, the incidental sounds.
Oh, no, I don't look at you weird about that.
You have in the past.
I understand incidental sounds.
There is something about the sound effects of this game that I really like. For somebody who's pretty much immune to music, the sound effects of this game just get me. There's that grippy sound. When they grab a stone or they grab somebody by the shirt. You know the sound I'm talking about now?
I know the sound you're talking about, yeah.
I like all the little tiny sounds. Also, occasionally when you're casting spells or using special abilities, your characters will basically recite a poem, like they're casting the spell. But they don't do it all the time, which would be irritating as all get out. It's very random. So you could go through the entire game using one skill a lot and never know what the spell for it is. But I like, it adds a touch to the game that I actually like. It adds a certain depth to the characters and to the whole game.
It goes back to the fact that it is a very well crafted story that just is horrendous to play.
There's also a very large cast of characters. At a certain point, you have to start kicking people out of your party. Like, you can't keep everybody. There is a size limit to the party, and there's also one of my favorite things in games, unlockable hidden characters. Including Cloud from Final Fantasy VII is hiding in here.
Because Cloud in Final Fantasy VII was everywhere.
Yeah, I never managed to unlock him. But you can! He's in there, I swear. A lot of unlockable characters, which is also one of the things I liked about Shining Force. Another game you hated. Because you have no taste.
Because this game, so this game to me was kind of like the spiritual successor of Shining Force. It really was. Like, I feel like the Shining Force gameplay was very similar to this, too. Or this was similar to Shining Force.
Maybe in the gameplay, but in a lot of the mechanics, I would disagree. Like, there's like 5 hidden characters in this one. Right. Shining Force was all about recruiting your party from the world. And yes, there were hidden characters, but...
And this one, to its credit, also doesn't give you +1 speed for...
Oh my god.
4 hours of grinding experience, but...
This game also has the ability to recruit, train, and breed monsters, which is something I've almost never done in this game.
I didn't know that. I'm telling you, I played as much as I could, and then watched YouTube videos of the excellent story.
But yes, you can recruit monsters. There are special jobs and abilities to recruit monsters, but just following the story, you're guaranteed to get a chocobo, which will give birth to more.
Oh, you are, aren't you? Okay.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
And they have their own stats and their own abilities. You can't train them like jobs, but some of them are pretty useful. There's actually... like a black chocobo which can fly and cast chocobo meteor.
Please stop saying chocobo.
I'm not going to. Okay. You want me to do chocobo?
Chocobo.
Chocobo? Chocobo. I pronounce things wrong. We've established this. And then the last thing I want to talk about in innovations is another thing that I don't get into because it's just there's too much. But there are the zodiac symbols. Each character is born under a particular zodiac sign, which gives them strengths and weaknesses against other enemies that have different zodiac signs. Oh my god, the spreadsheet I would need to keep track of all that. And then characters also have brave and faith scores, which I don't pay much attention to other than a high brave score means they're better as a fighter, and a high faith score means they're better as a magic user. And that's one of those things that if you were one of those people who created the Legends 2 spreadsheet of Monster Eats This, you could really get into zodiac signs. And so basically, there's a lot here for different types of people except Russ, is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, this is not for me.
I've noticed. And since I've talked through this entire section and Russ has basically said nothing,
I'm just let you gush, kind of like you let me when we played Skies of Arcadia.
I loved Skies of Arcadia too.
I know, we were both
Yeah,
really
there was a
hyped on
lot of
that.
gushing going on there. But now Russ just wants to get out of this review, I think. So
I don't have anything for innovations because, I mean,
you barely played the
I
game.
barely played the game.
Mhm.
Yes.
Which I'm actually grateful for, because in order to challenge Russ to play more of the game, I went ahead and made a bet with him that I was really hoping I would not have to pay off on.
Yeah, I
And
knew
it was
you would
if
never-
he
I
beat
knew
the
you would
game,
never
I
win.
would have to watch all the episodes of his favorite anime.
It's not my favorite anime.
If he beat the game, I would have to watch all the episodes of his favorite anime, which I believe is called Nervous Girl is Nervous. I think is the name of it.
Well, that's accurate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So, luckily, Russ did not beat the game, and I do not have to watch Nervous Girl is Nervous. I'm kind of grateful for that, although I did think he'd get further than... How far did you actually get? When did you actually stop playing?
I fought like maybe 5 battles.
Did you finish an act?
And it was,
a chapter?
No.
Oh.
I didn't know you could raise monsters. This has gotten away from us.
Mike! So we're back, and we actually have a musical person. Mike,
Yeah, right.
talk music to me.
Okay, I will talk music to you. So, should we start with some general opening thoughts from the experienced players on the couch?
Well, I played approximately 4 hours of this game.
Okay, yeah. So some music, but maybe not all of it, right? Okay. And
I've played the entire game, and I can tell you there definitely is music.
there's definitely music, that's right. So, why don't we talk a little bit more about that?
That sounds great.
Doesn't that sound like a great idea? Okay, so Final Fantasy Tactics. It is fair to say that this is a BGD in video game music world. This was a landmark soundtrack.
What
for
is a BGD?
a big goddamn deal?
Okay.
So a landmark soundtrack, not just in terms of video game composition, but also for the gentleman who created it. So Final Fantasy Tactics was scored by two guys, Hitoshi Sakamoto and Masaharu Iwata. And
Why does that Iwata name sound familiar to me?
maybe you're thinking of Satoru Iwata,
Who knows?
past president of Nintendo.
Yeah, that's
Tragically,
probably what I was
passed away
thinking
of
of.
cancer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nope, I derailed you for no reason. Go on.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. And I also feel like I need to point out that because you're our audience at home watching this, you get to see what you don't always get to see when you listen on. Well, you don't get to see anything when you listen to podcasts, but if you listen to podcasts, folks talk about soundtracks, and it seems amazing, like it's all extemp. Here's the reality, folks. They're all just like me. They've got their notes up here, so I've got a Google Doc, and you're going to see my eyes sort of dart around as I try to pull information nuggets out of this for you. So, Hitoshi Sakamoto, Masaharu Iwata.
Is that who we are now?
Yes,
You just
you're
assigned
role
us?
playing, so
Okay.
just pretend I'm not here.
Konnichiwa. I'm out.
Hyperdimension Neptunia.
Ganbaru.
And now make music together.
Itadakimasu. I'm saying all the Japanese that I know.
I said all the Japanese. Mushi mushi. Now I'm out.
Okay, good. So,
Sorry.
so Sakamoto and Iwata are longtime friends. In fact, they met in high school, and they had a mutual interest in games, and they began creating games together, actually, and then that led them to long and illustrious careers in game composition, including the soundtrack we're going to talk about in just a moment, right? So this is maybe the maturation of that partnership, because by the time that they come together to do Final Fantasy Tactics, they have already collaborated together to do the music for two Ogre Battle games, March of the Black Queen and Let Us Cling Together. And it's no accident that both of those games were written by and directed by Yasumi Matsuno, who also wrote and directed Final Fantasy Tactics. So there's a deep friendship there, and Matsuo brought together his favorite game composers to do this great soundtrack for Final Fantasy Tactics. They would go on to collaborate again in future on Final Fantasy XII, which is perhaps Hitoshi Sakamoto's most famous composition. I don't even think you could argue that. It's beloved, especially now that it's been re-recorded in a fully orchestral version for
Final
the
Fantasy
Zodiac
12
Age.
is amazing.
Yes.
And you're right, because even though I usually don't notice music, it is amazing.
So even if
Final
you're
Fantasy 12,
music
yeah.
agnostic, that has a way of leaving a big impression. So they have this deep collaboration, and Final Fantasy Tactics is probably the fullest expression of that at its time, right? So these are both old hands at the time that the game comes out. 1997. That means they've been working in games for almost a decade at that point. But this is an order of magnitude in terms of its complexity. Together, they turn in 71 tracks. They don't collaborate on any individual track, but they separate the work out. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Sakamoto here because not only is he so prominent in the video game music world, he's, if not a household name, he's still up there in the echelons alongside people like Sugiyama, Uematsu, Yuzoko Shiro. So he's a big one. And in fact, he kind of directed the production of music for Final Fantasy Tactics. So he took the lead. That means not only is he composing most of the soundtrack, about 66% is to his credit, but he's also taking on the more trying to find a way to put this so it doesn't make it seem like Matsuo's contributions don't count, because they do. But Sakamoto takes on maybe the more
lion's share.
Yeah, the memorable pieces, the pieces that are going to reinforce the themes of the story or communicate something about character. So he does the character portraiture, character themes. He's doing the battle music. The pieces that are really going to carry some emotional resonance and kind of help either communicate the story or move the story forward in the form of music, right? And Matsuo is doing other kinds of things like the tonal pieces, mood music in particular, what we tend to think of as background music, because it's meant to communicate a feeling rather than a hummable melody, perhaps. And he's also going to do a lot of the more sort of jingle-like themes.
I feel like we saw a similar division of labor in Skies of Arcadia when you described it to us. That
Yeah.
one person was responsible for the more epic, and the other was responsible for the milder, moodier.
Yeah, and I think that's, I don't think it's unusual to have this kind of arrangement where you have someone who has a sense of the goal for the project, the way the project should sound. It may be that Sakamoto is working very closely with Matsuo to identify, what should a player be feeling in this moment. Are you feeling the betrayal enough? Are you feeling whatever emotion is in that scene? And so it may be that you just have one person who's more intimately knowledgeable about whatever a given thing needs, and then from there it just becomes a question of labor. And we're talking about 2.5 hours of music here, which is pretty incredible. Especially, this is 1997. We're really not that far out from a generation where soundtrack may clock in at like 22 minutes worth of music.
Which is about how much of it Russ heard.
Yeah, right.
Right, yeah.
Good. So there's a lot of music here, and we can't listen to all of it. Fortunately for you, it's on YouTube. No shortage of uploads for you to listen to here, but I've picked a few things that I hope will demonstrate what makes Sakamoto such a talented composer and what makes this soundtrack in particular so memorable. So before we do that, I thought I would give you a little background sketch on Sakamoto himself. That sounds delectable.
Tell me
Something you'd
more
like
about
to
this Sakamoto fellow.
nibble
I
on?
feel like he's got some potential.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
Sakamoto,
Or yeah.
Really?
if you play Persona 5.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. It's what happened?
Sakamoto.
What happened? Atlas. Come on. Okay. So I think Hitoshi Sakamoto's career is worth sketching in more detail because he's not a singular figure in video game music, but he's kind of there at if not its origin, certainly the point at which it begins to get really interesting. It's video game music is beginning to be music. It's something more than just beeps or bloops or something that's meant to attract you from across the floor of an arcade, right? So he is a self-described video game and tech geek. He comes to games as a fan, and in fact that's how he meets his co-composer Iwata in high school. They both discover this mutual interest in video games, and they decide, well, it's great fun to play them, of course, but wouldn't it be great if we make our own games? So that's exactly what they did. They got
See,
together.
I keep telling you, we can do that.
You
We
can't do
have
that.
no skills or abilities.
Right.
Made with Unity. Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that. Like, it's so much easier today than it would have been then. It's kind of hard to imagine how they would have gone about this. Apparently, there was enough of a hobbyist scene that they had support from some of their friends, and there was enthusiasm, and in fact, there was even a marketplace sort of built into the hobbyist scene here. I'm getting ahead of myself. So
Sorry.
they get together and they create a game, and they create a game for the PC 8801 called Revolter. This is 1988, and when you're working on a hobbyist project like that and you don't know what you're doing, very often you just kind of have to take the piece that makes sense to you and work on whatever you seem to be doing well. And labor is sort of parceled out that way. Like, I'm just going to give you this thing. I'm going to hope and pray that you can make it work. And that's how Sakamoto comes to game composition. He has no musical background, no musical training. It just turns out that he has a knack for programming music. And so he creates the score to this game Revolter. And there's this, I mentioned this built-in marketplace. There's a major comic convention in Japan called Comiket. It's the largest place for trading doujinshi. And by 1988, it's already a phenomenon, 70,000 visitors or so. And so they're able to take this game out as fans only and sell it direct, which is kind of amazing. But that is how he gets a foothold in the industry. So already he's kind of developing a sense that he wants to work in music in particular. He starts out as a programmer, decides music's really, I've got this knack for it, I really like it. His programming expertise is so invaluable at this time because, of course, to make music for the Famicom or for the Game Boy, it's very different than it is now, right? You actually have to program these sounds in. You have to write to data registers in order to create a waveform, in order to produce sound. And so, although you did have composers like Koichi Sugiyama who were coming from a kind of a proper background, musical training, making compositions, then they would hand them off to someone else who would have to then do the work of programming them into a sound driver of some kind. Sakamoto is interesting because his career progression is the opposite of Sugiyama. He's actually coming to an orchestral sound, like Tactics, hang in there, we're getting to it. And he's coming to it from this programming background, unlike Sugiyama. He's working in the reverse, right? So Sakamoto has skills that are very much in demand and very hard to get. He can actually create sounds, can create music, and then program it directly. And he has this early success creating a driver that he calls Terpsichorean, named after the Greek god of music and dance. Greek muse of music and dance. And the way that he's described this in an interview is, you imagine that you've got an operating system, right? But no software to run on it. You have something that's up and running and will let you, it's an environment in which you can create a game, but how do you then create music? Like, how are you even writing to those registers? Well, he creates the sound driver that lets him do that, and that driver is then adopted by their game studios and so forth. So, very early on, having a major impact on the way that even his colleagues in other game studios can create music. So, again, his first soundtrack is co-composed in 1988. It's only 2 years before he goes out on his own as a solo composer. He writes 3 tracks for the Game Boy game Bubble Ghost.
Why do I feel like I've heard about this before?
Yeah, this seems
I love
familiar.
Bubble Ghost.
Right. So he creates the music for Bubble Ghost, and it's incredibly mature and complex for a Game Boy game. In fact,
Well, for a game called Bubble Ghost, I expect it to be mature.
yeah,
That
adult
sentence fell apart on
themes.
me, yeah.
Yeah. So we should hear just a little bit of this, particularly if you go back and listen to the Final Fantasy Legend 2 episode. You're going to hear some music that is a little less complex than this. And again, you have to remember, 2 years as a professional composer, his first solo effort, and here's the original soundtrack to Bubble Ghost. We're going to hear the main background music here.
It's a very menacing game, apparently. What just happened?
There it goes. Nose there. So yeah, I like it. You say this. It has this very menacing.
And then-
It's kind of a gimme, gotcha rather, right? It's
Yeah.
like, it's a horror, no, not so much, because in fact, if you can, like, there's your Bubble Ghost. Not really something to hide from. No need to pull up the sheets.
Did
around
either
your
of
head.
you ever play the Space Quest games on the PC?
Yes.
They do a similar thing when you die. It's the death dirge. Dun 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 dun.
Oh, yeah,
Dun,
yeah.
dun, dun 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 dun.
Right. Yeah. As you can hear there, that's not orchestral, and it's not full
was
of
certainly
pomp
happy, though.
or grandeur. Right. And I think it's sort of worth pointing that out because Sakamoto's background is actually in techno and pop, and that's his chief influence, right? He's talked many times about Yellow Magic Orchestra, which is a major touchstone for many video game composers. He's also a big Genesis fan. Pre-Phil Collins, I like he points this out. Pre-Phil Collins really likes Genesis, so again, you have this prog influence. But so he's coming to what are eventually compositions that we tend to associate more with an orchestra or an orchestral hall than with like a rock show. But I think it's nice to hear Bubble Ghost because again you have this progression of moving toward the orchestra. So you can sort of trace this in individual games, right? You can listen to King Breeder or Gauntlet, especially. He does the music for Super Back to the Future 2. And he's flirting with an orchestral style in all these cases, not least because as sound hardware improves, he has more channels to work with, and the synthesizer sounds are getting a little better at approximating real instruments. And so this brings us more or less up to speed, right? At the moment, we come to 1997 and Final Fantasy Tactics. And so as I've mentioned, Sakamoto takes the lead role, and he's responsible for most of this very cinematic soundtrack. He takes on the battle themes, he takes on the character themes. And having already worked with pretty sophisticated hardware like the Super Famicom, you find with the PlayStation what must have seemed like a limitless possibility. The memory that you have to work with is much expanded. And I mean, just looking at the sound hardware itself, trying to find a note here. Note to self. Where have I found my notes?
While he skims through his notes,
Yeah.
I saw that Tactics Ogre was mentioned. We should try that one since you like tactical RPGs so much.
Thank you.
And I've never played it.
Thank you so much for that mention.
Have you
And
ever played
I can't
Tactics
wait.
Ogre?
I have not.
You can stop me when you find what you're looking for.
Oh, okay, yes. So, speaking of Tactics Ogre, here's some information on the PlayStation 1 sound chip. So, the PS1 offers, and a lot of this is, frankly, this is for beyond my ken, but what I can tell you that I think is somewhat meaningful is that the PlayStation 1 offers 16-bit pulse code modulation with 24 channels, and that's the important part, 24. So
Which is a bit higher than the 4 we had last month.
exactly. So moving from 4 on the Game Boy up to 24 is again.
Just imagine how fancy Bubble Ghost could have been.
Yeah, exactly. So, and on top of that, you also have a much improved sampling rate. So you can actually sample a real instrument and play that back, and all of that means that you're getting sound that is much closer to the real thing. to employing an orchestra.
Would you
and
argue
liking
that it's
orchestra.
even better than the real thing?
Well, I think I'm glad you mentioned it, because we're going to hear some selections in a moment, and let's just say that taste is subjective, and you will be the judge. I think the soundtrack in general is incredibly lush, and more often than not it works. I do think occasionally it dips into something I can only describe as like an uncanny valley for sound.
Interesting.
You can hear what the composer is going for, but it doesn't quite get there, and you're left with that feeling of like uncomfortable. Just some feeling that something profane is happening. You can't explain it.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
it's not
so
quite
you
that
had
bad,
some
but-
experiences
Yeah.
listening to this soundtrack. You went through some emotion.
Yeah, you're left feeling like someone has pulled the rug out from under me, and I'm disoriented. What is happening to me? It's not quite that bad, but it is worth zeroing in on one moment in particular where I think you'll probably hear that. You're going to hear the syntheticness of some of the orchestration here. So we've talked a lot. I think it's probably good to let the music speak for itself now. And I pulled out a few things that I think are characteristic of Sakamoto's work on the soundtrack. And so let's hear a few Sakamoto compositions, and then we can contrast those with Iwata. And you can hear maybe some of the difference there, right? So without further ado, this is the hero's theme, and this creates a motif for the soundtrack. You hear this selection repeated in other pieces, right? And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment after you've had a chance to hear it. And I'm scrolling, and here it is. This is, again, the hero's theme. Okay, so hero's theme.
What's interesting is, to me, I could see that being like the ending theme of a lot of the games we play. Like, as the final credits roll, and you flash back, maybe a melancholy ending, right? Am I alone in this, Russ? Am I just all by myself?
I enjoyed it. It sounded, again, having no musical knowledge or experience at all.
This is fair.
It sounded very Chrono Cross to me.
Okay, I was trying to think of what it was reminding me of, and that might be it.
Which Chrono Cross is the first game that I ever played where I really noticed music.
Oh, well, that would make sense, right? That's Mitsuda, yeah. So that's
And we will get to Chrono Cross eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We've done Chrono Trigger, so any day
Right.
now.
All right. So I'm glad that you pulled out the melancholy there, right? And I think if you are familiar with the story, or there's ample reason for that,
Yeah.
right? And so this is
It is not a bubble ghost, happy-go-lucky kind of story.
No, and to have that to be so prominent in the hero's theme of all places is not an accident, right? And the fact that this selection recurs in other selections clearly meant to locate you, hero, in the heart of whatever action is taking place at that time, and in fact that's often very difficult and upsetting, because the story is one of betrayal, and I mean, you've talked about the story, right? So I don't need to go into that. But you have this beautiful wistful duet between a harp and then another plucked instrument, maybe a bass harp, where one is carrying the main melody, the other is kind of doing a contrasting melody underneath that, it's drenched in reverb, and I think that in particular gives it that sadness. So that's the hero's theme, and that's a pretty simple composition. Not to say that it's not affecting, but it's certainly in terms of its structural complexity, you've got two voices that are sounding there, right? So if we contrast that with Ovalia's theme, then we hear something that begins to show off a little more of the PlayStation's hardware and its sound capabilities. So this is Ovalia's theme by Hitoshi Sakamoto. And I should probably unmute that.
Only if you want us to hear it. Picturing a princess in a field of flowers. Is that just me?
Oh, me too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh God! I'm glad we're all thinking about a woman with flowers dancing. Maybe a little cartoon bird comes down.
It's worth letting this loop a bit because you're already hearing something very important here, something different. Music is the same, but not. The tempo is slowed ever so slightly. It's become a little more lugubrious. Again, not an accident when you're writing scores to communicate something about a character or that character's ultimate fate. As it slows down. A moment like that pregnant pause, holding you in suspense, creating some tension. And so here we have Ovalia's theme, and what you're hearing, in addition to that incredible repetition. So you know the track is going to loop, and then the track loops, and you think that's video game music for you. It has changed in a way that you might miss, but it clearly has a different emotional register. It's very sad. This is a track that begins with great optimism, right? It's kind of, there's a nice quick tempo to it. It's very cheerful, and by the time it's over, you're kind of wiping a tear from the corner of your eye. And again, you've covered the story, so I don't need to tell you. And maybe this is a spoiler warning, right? So I just won't say anything at all. But suffice to say, there's foreshadowing in some of this music, and so what we have here again is not only do we have tracks that are just more structurally complex and rich in terms of their sound. The sound is a little more convincing, but we have a shift in what video game music is for, right? It's not just background music. It's not something to lure you to put a quarter in a machine. Now it's story.
It's part of the story, yeah.
Right? It's cinema. This is moving much closer to a long tradition of music in film, right? So those are two of the character themes. I think it would be really silly to talk about Final Fantasy Tactics and not listen to some of the panel music. After all, what are those tactics for? Right?
Yes.
It's not a dating simulator, although some of us might.
Some of us would prefer that. Yeah.
So let's listen to one of the pieces of martial music. This is Anti-Pyretic.
very sinister, looming aspect to the battle thing, which is not normally. I mean, that's normally going to be reserved for like boss fights or whatever.
So the outcome is not necessarily certain.
Exactly. I mean, it's more of a struggle against darkness.
What I like about this track especially is that it clearly has passages. It's not a sweep, obviously, but there's a lot of dynamic richness here too, right? It isn't just sort of let's hit the player over the head with this loud and urgent sound for 3 minutes and then loop it. So there's a practical reason to move into a section like this, which is a little calmer, right? Which is these battles might end up taking quite a while.
They do. They take a little while.
You don't want to strain
Time
the ear.
for you to sit and enjoy them.
Yeah. But, I think as you pointed out so astutely, does this battle end in victory or does it end in a game over? And depending on what's happening in the story, it may be necessary to communicate something about a less than optimal fate. And so what you have here is you begin with a cymbal crash, and that will wake you up if nothing else will, right? You have chimes, melody is carried by a horn section, and there's just a richness and a depth to the strings here. They are clearly layered. You have multiple channels together playing the same sound, or the same voice rather, to create that timbral texture of a string section. And so what you have here is something that is like an orchestra, right? This is prefiguring where Sakamoto is going to be in not too many years' time. He's actually going to be directing an orchestra. And here he's beginning to develop that voice, the voice of a composer. So that's antipoetic. So I sort of mentioned, maybe not so generously a moment ago, that occasionally the sound does sort of veer into pure synthesis. To me, it doesn't sound convincing, and whether that bothers you or not just has a lot to do with, I think, your own history of the game and your tastes with respect to VGM. I want to be clear that this is, I'm going to pick on Battle on the Bridge a little bit, just a little bit, and I'm not saying anything about the nature of the composition itself, but the limitations of the hardware that Sakamoto is working with, or the synthesizer that's being played here. And so let me shut my app and play you Battle on the Bridge, and maybe you can hear what I'm getting at. So, I point this out just to say that, as Sakamoto himself has allowed in interviews, he feels like most of his career was always struggling against the limitations of the hardware he was working with in order to produce something beautiful or memorable or something that enriched the player's experience of the game. And I think he has unquestionably done that with Final Fantasy Tactics. And yet, I do think there, with that frenetic, decrescendo type section, you hear some of the limitations. There's something about that particular string sound that just says, I'm not a real string section. It draws attention to itself, and it doesn't, to me, it doesn't quite have the effect that it would have if this were re-recorded. And so, again, that's going to be a matter of taste. I think there are people that, just as there's kind of a fondness now for low poly graphics, right? Those are coming back into vogue. undeniably people are going to feel nostalgic about this particular kind of sound, and I think you'll begin to hear it. People are going to deliberately try to invoke this era by playing with less than optimal technologies, and yet I hear this and think, God, I would love to hear real strings playing that. So just worth pointing out that even though there's more channels to work with here, we're still working with a limited sound. And it might also be worth mentioning here as a side note that this is about the moment when game audio begins to move toward fully orchestrated sound or playing back licensed music, because of course the PlayStation 1 is CD based. Mm-hmm. There is storage for uncompressed music files, large audio files, and so this is also the advent of Redbook audio, and so you start to have the situation where you can take a PlayStation game and you can pop it in a CD player and you can actually just listen back to the tracks, right? Because they've just added them straight to the CD. They're not hidden in program data at all. And I don't know if that's the case with Final Fantasy Tactics. It is the case with Symphony of the Night. You can listen to Symphony of the Night on your CD player because it's Redbook audio. So I mentioned that just because Symphony of the Night, to me, sounds a lot like this. They have a similar kind of sound. But the difference appears to be, and again, maybe you should try this at home. If you've got a copy of Final Fantasy Tactics, put it in your CD player. Don't play the first track, because you might blow it up, but see if you have other audio tracks you can listen to, because I don't know if these are instructions that are being played out by the PlayStation's hardware, if they were pre-recorded. But they do sound very similar. I mentioned this impossible thing. Both of these gentlemen were just agog at me when we started out, because I said that in doing a little bit of research for this episode, I found a YouTube comment that was actually instructive. Yeah. It was humane. Nobody was insulted.
And it wasn't calling me fat, which is, I think, what most YouTube, like, I don't own a mirror, but I think most YouTubers want to communicate.
It is, yeah. This really ought to be put under glass in a museum somewhere, and it should be described. It's a kind of an amazing thing. So there's a track on this soundtrack called, and I shit you not, Wink, it's called Bloody Excrement.
Classy.
Yeah, right. So Bloody Excrement. And
Russ had that once.
We've all been there. Depending on what we're having for lunch, we might be there again. So, yeah, no chimichangas. Where am I going? Bloody Excrement. Okay,
Excrement.
So,
there's a sentence I don't know has been uttered before. Where am I going?
Yeah.
Bloody excrement.
So, you can imagine, I'm looking over the track list for this, I'm listening to all the stuff, here comes this track, and I'm doing a double take. And I'm thinking, without having played the game, like, what is happening in this moment, right? Like, is this a mini game? If someone come down with a terrible case of dysentery that, like, upsets, that changes the course of the war. Don't really know. So this is interesting. I mentioned this specifically to point out the way that, again, the music here is doing more than just sort of occupying your ears while you make decisions on behalf of your units, right? This is communicating something about story. And so here's the comment. I'm just going to read this from YouTuber Johnny Rocket Fist. Thank you for your service.
We salute you.
So the title of this song is perfect, he says. And this comes after many, many comments which people are like, sounds like a metal band, LOL. Not Johnny Rocket Fist. Mr. Rocket Fist is like, excuse me, draws himself up, and he says,
Mr. Rocket Fist was his father. He likes to go by Johnny.
Yeah, all right, J-Man. So the title of the song is perfect. There is a mission the song plays when Ramza and the Knights hunt down some thieves that have been running for days. Running for long periods of time, plus dehydration, equals bloody excrement. And I looked this up, and this is true. If you're dehydrated, the shit that you pass is going to be dried, it's going to be hard, it's probably going to tear you up. He goes on to add, they had been running like dogs for days, trying to get away, and finally had to make a last stand. Not being able to find the time to change clothes or clean up, they probably fought soiled and bloody. Also explains why some cadets could take down war veterans. So, this is kind of amazing to me.
It is a very nuanced discussion of excrement.
It tells you something about the nature of the conflict that you've just played through in the story or that you've experienced. And unless you happen to own a copy of the soundtrack, I can't imagine that you would put that together, right? This is something that the composer clearly understood about that moment. I don't think there's any way to communicate that through song necessarily, but through the description you get something that's very similar to the item descriptions that you have in Demons or Dark Souls or Bloodborne, where the story comes together through the environment and through the little bit of clues that you can sort of piece together from the artifacts in this world. There isn't anyone alive anymore to say, sit down, let me tell you what's happened to our city, stay a while and listen. Yeah, no, right, the world has gone to hell. So if you want to try and do your detective work in between fighting off werewolves and giant space snakes and things, that's up to you, Sherlock. So just kind of an amazing moment here for 1997 to have something like that. So I've jabbered a lot about Sakamoto. Yes, he had a co-composer in the soundtrack, and a wonderful one. I want to be sure not to do a disservice to Masaharu Iwata, because not only did he create something like, I believe it's 24 tracks for this game, many of them are great. Some of them are clearly just are mood pieces. They're just meant to establish kind of feeling.
Unfortunately, I think this is the last track we're going to have time for.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, let's get right to it. So, this is a fantastic selection. It plays when you first enter a city. The city's name is escaping me. Did I note that? I did not. You'll have to rely on the experience.
Yeah, I'm
here.
great with names. It's gonna work great.
The name of the song is
And thank you for being here, Steve. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah. Fur, Meat, and Bones Store, and this is by Iwata.
I believe this is actually the soundtrack for the Fur Store, which is where you go to sell animal or monster components, which is a part of the game I never really got that into. But I think it also is part of the reason for the simplicity. It's a shop scene.
Yeah.
And it's a shop scene you're going to see 1,500 times.
Yeah, and so I'll just also very quickly play. This is short. This is The Pub, also by Masaharu Iwata.
This one I know well, because you hear this constantly. So it sounds like he got the more pedestrian tracks that you encounter more often.
Yeah, I think, so I really like this piece of music. I think I'm going to be tapping my toe to this for days. It's relatively straight ahead, and it's got a fairly simple or simplistic melody. Again, that's not to create a judgment on it, just to say that in comparison to some of the other tracks we've heard that you hear on the soundtrack, there's less going on. There's less note complexity. There are less voices, right? In fact, in the Pub selection, we have it's interesting. This is both true of Fur, Meat, and Bone Store and Pub. There's more going on than you might hear on a first listen. In fact, there are 6 voices present in Fur, Meat, and Bone Store. You have a gong that opens the song, right? And then you've got a bed that consists of an 8-note celeste. It sounds like a celeste to me. So you have 8 notes on a celeste. The cello is kind of droning away in the background, and then you've got some strings that are doing these little stabs, also in the background. And then on top of all of that, you have a melody that comes in on a woodwind, maybe an oboe. Your ears might be sharper than mine, and it kind of takes places in this duet, right? They kind of trade voices, the oboe, and then what is clearly a bassoon playing the melody. And so the Pub is not quite that busy, but also has a lot going on, and yet your experience of it is a rather direct melody, is something that's very catchy and hummable without exhausting the ear. Like you say, it's something you're going to hear many, many times, and it's hopefully a welcome repetition rather than one where you're reaching and turning down your Vita, listening to podcasts. Yeah, it was me at Spelunky. Like, I'm not gonna listen to the music in Spelunky a minute longer than I have to. So you get these tracks, and the pub in particular, that's such a warm, round, unhurried sound. It's really pretty, and so those are the kinds of contributions he's making, right? So necessary, important, and yet still probably going to be overshadowed to some extent by the more complex or gripping.
Yes, the more heroic and driving tunes.
Yeah. So I have to give some shout outs to the many who've come before me here in putting together these notes. I relied heavily on a composer biography by Chris Greening at VGMO, which is excellent. And that links out to a number of other interviews that Sakamoto has given with VGM enthusiasts over the years. Some of those links are broken, thank God for the Wayback Machine. Just stick that into archive.org and you can recover most of these. There's a terrific interview at gaming.moe that Heidi Kemp's conducted. And there are podcasts, a number of podcasts that have really zeroed in on Sakamoto. And the one that I'd recommend you check out if you're interested in hearing more across his gamography is a podcast called Super Mercato Brothers, Mercato. Maybe you can put these in the show notes. So this is where the brother composers, Carl and Will Brueggemann, they talk at length about Sakamoto. And unlike me, they have musical training, and they know how to describe what they're hearing in terms of music theory. So if you have an interest in understanding the kinds of chord selections that Sakamoto is making, the full range of his influences, in particular the linkage to Alan Silvestri's music and the kind of influence there, they have a lot more information for you than I can provide. So I recommend you check that out.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I guess now it's time to move on to final thoughts.
Final thoughts.
Story A+. Gameplay F.
I think from the very beginning of this review, my opinion has been fairly clear. I'd give it an A. I don't know if I'd give it an A+, because it is longer and slower than some of the other games that we've played, although I often find that to be the charm of it. Modern gaming, it can be a little bit of a hindrance to get through. But I'm still going to say it's an A. Like Russ said, it's a great story, and I love the combat system. We've learned from this that for some reason Fire Emblem is an exception, but Russ doesn't like tactical RPGs, so his opinion is not to be trusted.
Yeah, well, so final thoughts. Actually, my thoughts are more like initial thoughts, because my intention for this episode was to do more than to come on and barge into this discussion, this wonderful discussion you've had with these experienced gentlemen. I wanted to contribute to that in some way that had more to do with the game than just its soundtrack, which, to be honest with you, I've listened out of context. Oh my god. But this crazy thing happened, right? When I booted up the game on my Vita, I got through the opening movie, and I got situated, and I was enjoying the story. I was in the chapel. Everything was unfolding. This is a very beautiful game, even now. I love diorama type setups in games of all kinds anyhow. So I'm like ready to go, and I just bounced off of this, and I feel like that's maybe fair warning to anyone who's coming to this from a place where maybe inexperience with tactical RPGs, that's me, or experience with tactical RPGs that have some modern innovations, particularly the ability to speed up battles. That's something that I really struggled with. And also, I think this is kind of where I wonder if people are going to disagree with me here. That's fair, right? This is the internet. We can have disagreements in a civil way. I feel like the learning curve here is pretty dang steep. And although there is this tutorial, it's very much a kind of put yourself through this outside of the game, and you may want to take notes, and it goes on for quite a long time, and it's about as much fun as watching a PowerPoint. So I feel like some people are just going to be quite good at throwing themselves in here and learning as they go. But I would just say, really, this is me talking to future version of myself. Like, the next time you come to this game, because I do feel like I've got to crack it. It's so beloved. This is a major, major hole in my gaming experience. Note to self, spend a lot of time on any of the very well-developed wikis that can really help you to get a foothold before just trying to throw yourself into the game itself, because the tutorials are not as well integrated as I might have liked.
And a score.
Oh, I couldn't possibly. Yeah, scoring the game, this is very much a question mark out of 10 stars. Glimmering in some number, some constellation that I can't yet glimpse. Maybe in a future episode I can drop in here and tell you what I think about some way that would be responsible and fair to all the men and women involved in this creation.
So do you know off the top there, off your head, if they want to play this game, where do they get it? You don't know?
Yeah, I mean, PSP or...
There is a
Are
remake.
you asking me for real, or are you arguing?
I can start again if it would help. So Russ, if they want to play Final Fantasy Tactics, where do
You
they go?
didn't say it like that.
So Russ, if they want to...
I'm the actor. I'm the talent.
I wish I could say he's just showing off because there's visitors, but this is what it's like.
No, this is just me.
I have 20 minutes of footage of us trying to get ready to film the first review where he's talking about everything but the review. So Russ, if they want to play Final Fantasy Tactics, where can they get it?
Well, you can get the original PS1 release.
Also on a virtual store for the PS3.
You can PS3 virtual console. There is a PSP version called War of the Lions, which adds
a remake. It adds a couple
something.
job
Yeah.
classes. I don't know how much more it adds than just a couple job classes, but it's it's more or less the same game. So
and those are the versions that I know of.
me as well.
Yeah.
So I recommend going out and getting it and playing it if you like tactical RPGs. Let's say that.
I recommend watching a YouTube video of all of the story because it is worth the story is worth experiencing.
And the fact that as much as he could not play the game, the fact that he's still recommending you go out and look at the story.
You know what I would like? I would like if it had the feature from, what was it, the Persona 4 fighting game?
Where you
can skip all the fighting and you just watch the visual novel portion. Like, I would buy Final Fantasy Tactics
the
story mode. Like, just take out all of the unnecessary combat.
Which in and of itself should be high praise.
It is high praise, yeah.
Because he hated the game,
Yeah.
but he loved the story of the game. And when you're playing JRPGs, one of the main things, the reason it's, apart from personal history, story and characters are the first thing we discuss for a reason. The story is one of the most important parts of a JRPG. It's one of the reasons I like the genre and wanted to get more into the genre by doing this series, because I like stories. I play video games for stories. And that's one of the things that JRPGs do best, is their stories. So, if you like tactical RPGs, even Russ will tell you this game has a great story.
Mm-hmm.
I love the combat. I also liked Shining Force. He hated Shining Force. I like Hyper Devotion Noir Goddess Blackheart. He won't play it.
I
So
wouldn't tell a lot of people that, but that's me.
it's a really good tech. Anyway, so next time, Russ has picked the game that we are playing. Do you remember what it is?
Yes, I do remember
Would you
what it is.
like to tell the folks at
We
home?
are playing Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon, the RPG.
Every single time.
Yeah, I don't know why that's my favorite joke.
I don't
no.
either.
We're playing Lunar 2, Eternal Blue for the Sega CD.
All right. So we'll see you guys there.
Thank you for being a
friend.
friend. Traveling
Traveling
down the road and back again. Your heart is true, you're a pal and a confidant. And if you threw a party, invited everyone you knew, you would
you're actually
see.
All right. Every time we bring somebody in,
Heart attached would
every
say,
time